blood moon.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Silent Frequency. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video.
In the town of Hollow Creek, the moon had rules. It rose, it set, and it never, ever turned red. Until the night it did. People noticed it at different times. A farmer first, kneeling in his field, dirt still under his nails, looked up and felt his breath leave his body. Above him, the moon burned the color of fresh blood, thick, wet, alive. By midnight, the whole town was staring. No one remembered when the blood moon began, only that it felt personal, like it was watching them back. My name is Elias Crow, and I came to Hollow Creek to record sounds. Wind through dead trees, old floorboards groaning, the quiet of places people abandoned but never escaped. I didn't plan on staying. The locals warned me, not loudly, not directly. They spoke in unfinished sentences and nervous glances skyward. "Don't be outside when it peaks," one woman whispered at the diner. "Lock your doors before midnight. And if you hear knocking," an old man said, his hands shaking, "don't answer, not even if it sounds like someone you love." At 11:47 p.m., the air changed. It grew heavy, thick, like breathing through wet cloth. The moon climbed higher, redder, casting shadows that bent the wrong way. Houses leaned inward, trees stretched like reaching fingers. Then came the howling. SFX, distant howl, layered, human and animal. Not wolves, not dogs, something closer. Narrator lower, tense. I raised my recorder. That was my first mistake. Through my headphones, I didn't hear howling. I heard voices, crying, begging, calling my name. SFX, whispered voices, incomprehensible. "Elias, help me, open the door." My hands shook. The voice sounded like my sister. She died 5 years ago. Heartbeat louder. A knock echoed from the motel door. Once, twice, slow, polite. Voice outside, soft, wrong. "Elias, you forgot me." I didn't move. The moonlight bled under the doorframe, seeping like a living thing. The temperature dropped, frost crept along the walls. SFX, wood creaking. The knocking turned to scratching. Then laughter. Narrator whispering. That's when I realized the truth Hollow Creek never said out loud. The blood moon doesn't create monsters, it reveals them. SFX, sudden silence. And it was only beginning.
Hollow Creek was awake. Not alive, awake. Every house bled red light from its windows. Doors stood open like mouths frozen mid-scream. People stepped outside in silence, drawn by something older than fear. The blood moon hung impossibly close now. I could see texture in it, veins, cracks,
movement. It wasn't a moon. It was a wound. I ran down Main Street, my footsteps echoing too loudly, like the town wanted me to be found. That's when I noticed something wrong with the shadows. They weren't attached to their owners. They lagged behind, twitched independently. Some crawled. A woman stood under a streetlight, smiling at the sky. Tears ran down her face, steaming as they hit the ground. "It's so beautiful," she said. Her shadow peeled itself off the pavement. It stood up. The thing behind her looked like a reflection pulled from bad water. Wrong proportions, jagged edges, eyes too deep. She didn't scream when it wrapped around her. She sighed. And then they merged. I backed away slowly. Every instinct told me the same truth. The blood moon wasn't hunting bodies. It was collecting selves. I ducked into the old church at the end of the street. The doors slammed shut behind me on their own. Inside, candles burned red instead of yellow. The pews were filled, not with people, but with shapes pretending to be them. They all turned at once. At the altar stood something tall and thin, robed in shadow. Its face shifted constantly, every face I'd seen since arriving in Hollow Creek, including mine. We have waited through so many skies. Not sure what to say. What are you? We are what you leave behind. Regret, hunger, the parts you bury and feed in secret. The blood moon flared brighter through the stained glass windows, shattering them without sound. Tonight, the veil thins. Tonight, you stop pretending. I felt pressure behind my eyes, memories forcing their way forward. Every lie, every cruelty, every thought I never spoke aloud. My shadow stretched across the church floor. It didn't match my movements. It stood up, turned toward me, smiled. "You're tired of holding me back." I wanted to deny it, but under the blood moon, truth had gravity. Outside, Hollow Creek screamed for the first time, and I knew, by sunrise, no one would be whole again.
The scratching stopped at exactly 12 a.m. Not slowly, not naturally. One moment it was there, nails dragging across wood, and the next, nothing. Silence in Hollow Creek was never peaceful. It was expectant. I stayed frozen on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the door. The red light from my recorder blinked, steady as a pulse. That's when I heard it. A door opening. Not mine, somewhere outside. I moved to the window and pulled the curtain back just enough to see. Across the street, room 6 was open wide. I remembered the man who checked in earlier that night. Middle-aged, nervous smile. He asked the clerk if the locks worked. They did. just not for this. He stepped outside barefoot, wearing only a thin shirt. His eyes were glassy, unfocused, like he was sleepwalking. The blood moon washed over him, painting his skin crimson. He looked relieved. He spoke. "I hear her." From the shadows near the trees, something moved. At first, it wore the shape of a woman. Long hair, familiar posture, gentle smile. Then the moonlight shifted. Her limbs bent too far. Her neck twisted slowly, cracking like dry branches. The man took a step forward, then another. I wanted to scream, to warn him, but Hollow Creek doesn't let you interrupt the blood moon. The thing lunged. There was no struggle, no sound of pain, just a wet, choking gasp, and then nothing. The shadows swallowed them both. Long silence. Heartbeat resumes, faint. I stumbled back from the window, bile burning my throat. My recorder captured everything, every sound, every breath, and beneath it all, something else. A voice I didn't recognize. Voice distorted, close. "You see now." I shut the recorder off. That was my second mistake. The room darkened, the red moonlight bled brighter, crawling across the walls like veins. Then came the knocking again, this time from inside the room. Once, I didn't turn around. Twice. "You locked the wrong door, Elias." My breath caught, because the voice wasn't my sister's this time. It was mine. I ran, out the door, into the street, into the blood-red light. And that's when I saw it, doors opening all over Hollow Creek, one by one, the town answering the moon's call. The blood moon had chosen, and Hollow Creek was finally letting it in.
Elias ran from the church as the screams began to rise. They poured into the night from every direction, raw, panicked, inhuman. Hollow Creek had finally realized what it had invited. The blood moon pulsed above the town like a living heart, each throb sending waves of crimson light through the streets. People were changing. Some collapsed where they stood, clawing at their chests as shadows ripped free from their bodies. Others welcomed it, embracing their darker halves with smiles too wide to be human. The air smelled of iron and ozone, like a storm breaking inside reality itself. Elias staggered into the town square, gasping for breath. At the center stood the old clock tower, long abandoned. Its face was cracked, frozen at 12:13, the moment Hollow Creek was first settled. Beneath it, the ground had split open, revealing a pit that glowed red like molten flesh. And from that pit, the entity rose. It was taller now, more defined, its shifting face slowing until it settled on Elias's own. Every regret he'd buried stared back at him, every selfish choice, every moment he'd turned away when someone needed him. "You understand now," the entity said calmly. "The blood moon is not punishment, it is correction." Elias shook his head. "You're destroying them." "No," it replied, "we are completing them." Around the square, people fused with their shadows, becoming twisted reflections of who they truly were, violence, obsession, desire. Nothing was hidden anymore. Hollow Creek had become honest, and honesty was monstrous. The entity stepped closer. You are different. Elias felt it then, his shadow tugging at his feet, whispering promises, power, freedom, relief from guilt. You listen, you observe, you record, you do not interfere. That restraint has kept you incomplete. The blood moon brightened until the sky itself seemed to crack. Join us, it said, be whole, or end this. Elias stared at the pit beneath the tower. He understood what it was, a wound between worlds, fed by human denial. The blood moon wasn't eternal, it was anchored by a witness. You need someone to stay, Elias said quietly. The entity smiled. Yes, to keep the door open. Silence fell across the square. If I stay, the blood moon ends. For now, the entity agreed, but you will never leave. You will become part of the story Hollow Creek tells the sky. Elias thought of his sister, of the voice at the door, of the shadow that wore his face. He stepped forward. The ground swallowed him whole. As Elias disappeared, the blood moon dimmed. Shadows snapped back into place. Screams turned into sobs. Doors slammed shut. By dawn, Hollow Creek looked normal again. Empty. The clock tower stood silent, and deep beneath it, something watched the sky, waiting for the next red rise.
Morning came to Hollow Creek quietly, like it was afraid to wake something. Sunlight spilled over rooftops and empty streets, soft and ordinary. Birds returned to the trees. The air no longer tasted of metal. If someone arrived that morning, they would think the town had simply been abandoned in a hurry. They would be wrong. Inside the houses, signs remained. Bloody handprints washed clean but still visible in the grain of the wood. Mirrors cracked from the inside out. Beds untouched, as if their owners had stood up in the night and never lain down again. The people who survived did not speak about the blood moon. They avoided reflections. They locked their doors before sunset, and when the moon rose, white and harmless, they closed their curtains and prayed it would stay that way. At the edge of town, the motel stood empty. In room 3, an audio recorder sat on the nightstand, its red light blinking, though no one had touched it. Sometimes, late at night, it recorded by itself. Voices whispered through the static, names, confessions, things never meant to be said aloud. Beneath the clock tower, Elias Crow was still awake. He did not sleep. He did not age. He existed in the space between moments, bound to the wound that almost consumed Hollow Creek. The entity watched him with countless borrowed eyes. You did well. The door is sealed. For now, Elias replied. The pit beneath them pulsed faintly, like a scar that never fully healed. Above it, the world went on, ignorant, careless, endlessly repeating its mistakes. You'll be alone, the entity said. Elias smiled sadly. I already was. Time passed differently below the tower. Days folded into years, years dissolved into nothing. Elias listened to the thoughts that drifted down from the surface, the lies people told themselves, the shadows they fed in secret. Each lie strengthened the wound.
Each denial made the moon above a little heavier. One night, long after Hollow Creek had faded from maps and memory, Elias felt it. A pull. The sky trembled. The entity turned its shifting face upward. "Another town," it said. Far above, the moon began to darken at its edges, red bleeding slowly into white. Elias closed his eyes. Somewhere, someone was looking up in fear for the first time, and deep beneath the earth, the witness waited. Because the blood moon does not end. It only moves on.
The town was called Redmere. It sat beside a river that never froze in winter and never warmed in summer. People said it was because the water was deep, old, listening. On the first night the moon changed, no one panicked. At first, it was beautiful. A faint blush spread across the moon's surface like a shy secret. Couples stepped outside to take pictures. Children laughed. Someone posted a video online calling it romantic. They did not notice how the river stopped moving. Miles beneath the earth, Elias felt the shift. The wound stirred. "So soon," he murmured. The entity did not answer right away. It rarely did now. It no longer needed to explain itself. The blood moon had found new eyes. In Redmere, the dreams began before midnight. People dreamed of locked rooms, of doors they had sealed long ago, of voices they used to ignore, anger, jealousy, hunger, now whispering clearly. At 12:06 a.m., the first mirror shattered. A woman named Claire woke screaming as her reflection smiled back at her from broken glass. It spoke with her mouth, but not her restraint. It told her every cruel thought she'd buried under politeness. She covered her ears. The reflection climbed out anyway. Across town, a teenage boy followed a voice into the woods. It sounded like confidence, like courage. By morning, only his shadow returned. Redmere unraveled faster than Hollow Creek. The world was louder now, softer, more willing to listen to itself. Elias felt the pull grow stronger. The wound widened. "You can't hold this one alone," the entity finally said. Elias looked upward toward the faint red glow bleeding through layers of earth. "Then don't make me." Above, the river began to reflect the moon, not as it was, but as it wanted to be, huge, close, watching. People gathered on the bridge, drawn by a shared certainty that something important was about to happen. Someone laughed, someone cried, someone jumped. The blood moon swelled, feeding on the truth spilling freely into the night. Shadows peeled away eagerly now, no longer needing to be summoned. Redmere did not scream, it confessed. Elias closed his eyes and made a choice the entity did not expect. He let go. The wound did not seal, it spread. Across the sky, the red light fractured, no longer centered on one town, but many, hundreds, thousands. The entity recoiled. "Witness, this is not your role." Elias smiled for the first time in years. Neither was silence. Far above, people everywhere looked up as the moon deepened in color, and for the first time in human history, the blood moon rose everywhere at once.
The world noticed too late. At first, scientists argued atmospheric illusion, rare refraction, social media hysteria. News anchors smiled while the red spread behind them on studio screens, slow and undeniable. Then the clocks failed. Across continents, time slipped. Midnight arrived early in some places, never at all in others. Satellites lost signal as the moon's surface darkened, its red no longer a color but a depth, like staring into something that stared back. People felt lighter, heavier, unanchored. In cities, shadows pooled at the bases of skyscrapers, stretching across streets like spilled ink. In quiet villages, people stood alone in kitchens and bedrooms, listening to the sound of their own thoughts growing louder than their breathing. Confession became instinct. A man in Tokyo whispered apologies to an empty apartment. A preacher in Texas locked his church and wept in the dark. A woman in Paris smiled as her reflection stepped away from the mirror and took her hand. There was no single scream. There were millions of small ones. Beneath the earth, the wound had become an ocean. Elias stood at its edge, watching realities thin like wet paper. The entity no longer towered, it fractured, faces splitting, voices overlapping, certainty dissolving. This was never meant to be shared, it said, weaker now. Elias watched silhouettes rise from the wound, truths given form, shadows no longer bound to flesh. Then it was never meant to last. Above, the moon cracked, not exploded, cracked like an egg under pressure. Red light spilled through the fractures, raining down in soft sheets. Where it touched the ground, people stopped running, stopped hiding. Some fell to their knees, others stood straighter than they ever had. Few vanished entirely, leaving only shadows burned into walls. The sky responded. Clouds twisted into unfamiliar shapes. Stars blinked out one by one, as if embarrassed to witness what humanity had become when stripped bare. And still, the world did not end. It changed. Morning came unevenly. Some places woke to daylight, others remained locked in crimson twilight. Borders meant nothing now, neither did names. The blood moon hovered, broken but present, waiting. Elias felt himself thinning, his purpose unraveling. He had been a witness, a lock, a sacrifice. Now he was something else, a question. From the wound, a new sound emerged, not a voice, but a rhythm, a pulse answering the moon above, not hunger, recognition. The entity faded, its final faces dissolving into formless shadow. "You have taught them how to look," it whispered. Elias closed his eyes as the red light passed through him. Somewhere, a child looked up at the fractured moon without fear. Somewhere else, someone finally understood themselves and turned away from what they saw. The blood moon did not judge, it reflected. And the sky, at last, had its answer.
Years later, the moon never fully healed. It still rose cracked, pale white, stitched with veins of red, like a scar that refused to fade. Children grew up thinking that was how the moon had always looked, Only the oldest remembered when the sky felt distant and silent. The world learned to live exposed. There were fewer lies now, but the ones that remained were sharper. People avoided mirrors at night, not because reflections still stepped away, but because they remembered when they could have. Shadows behaved again, mostly. Some people claimed theirs moved when they weren't looking. Societies changed quietly. Confession became culture. Laws were rewritten around intent instead of appearances. Prisons emptied, then filled again, not with the cruel, but with the undishonest. Some called it progress, others called it the slow end of humanity. In forgotten places, ruins marked where towns like Hollow Creek and Redmere once stood. No one rebuilt them. The ground there was too warm, too aware. At the deepest point beneath one such ruin, something still listened. Elias existed as an echo now, not a man, not a god, a memory the world had made space for. He felt emotions the way ruins feel weather, passing through, leaving marks. Sometimes people dreamed of him, a man standing beneath a red-veined moon, watching without judgment. They woke with the strange comfort of being understood. The blood moon no longer fed, it observed. Once, long after the entity was forgotten, even as a myth, the sky darkened unexpectedly. Panic rippled through cities. Old fear returned like a muscle memory. But the moon did not deepen. It stayed the same, and nothing came through. Elias understood then. The wound had closed, not because it was sealed, but because it was no longer needed. Humanity had learned to look inward without being forced. Not all of them, not forever, but enough. The moon drifted higher, quiet and distant again. The stars returned, shy but present. And in the space between light and shadow, Elias finally felt himself fade. Not erased, released. The blood moon remained in the sky as a reminder, not of horror, but of truth. That what humans fear most is not monsters, it is being seen. Most ignored it. A few laughed. One person replied with a photo. The moon hung low over the horizon, scarred as always, but now something was wrong. The red veins no longer looked random. They curved, intersected, almost deliberate, like writing. Across the world, the same thing was happening. Different languages, same meaning. Are you watching us too? The question burned faintly across the moon's surface, visible only for minutes at a time, only to those who truly looked. Telescopes malfunctioned, screens glitched, but the human eye, unfiltered and afraid, saw it clearly. Panic returned. Not screaming panic, quiet panic, the kind that locks doors and deletes search histories, the kind that knows guilt. In a small coastal city, a girl named Mara stood barefoot on her roof, staring upward. She had never feared the blood moon. She'd grown up under its scarred light. Truth never frightened her. Loneliness did.
"Who's asking?" she whispered. The wind stopped, the ocean stilled, and for the first time since the wound closed, something answered, not with words, with direction. Mara felt it not in her mind, but in her bones, a pull, gentle but undeniable, leading her inland toward a place that no longer existed on maps, Hollow Creek. Beneath the ruined clock tower, something shifted. Elias had faded, that was true, but fading was not the same as ending. Awareness returned slowly, like light through deep water. He felt the question echo through the remains of himself. "Are you watching us too?" For the first time since becoming a witness, Elias felt something new. Fear. Not of the blood moon, of what came after. The sky darkened, not red, but deep blue, bruised and waiting. Stars dimmed again, not in shame this time, but anticipation. The moon's scars pulsed brighter. This was not revelation, this was conversation, and humanity had just spoken first. Mara did not tell anyone where she was going. She left before dawn, while the moon still lingered like an unanswered question. The roads leading inland were cracked and narrow, half swallowed by weeds. GPS failed an hour into the drive. Her phone lost signal, then power. None of it surprised her. Some journeys don't want to be tracked. By nightfall, she reached the edge of Hollow Creek, or where it used to be. The town sign lay rusted in the dirt, its name scratched out by something sharp and patient. Trees leaned inward, their branches tangled as if trying to keep her out. The air felt heavier here, old. Mara stepped past the sign and felt it immediately, the sense of being seen without being judged. Beneath the ruined clock tower, the ground hummed softly. The crack that once split the earth had sealed, but the scar remained, faintly warm beneath her feet. "You came," a voice said, "not from the air, from everywhere." Mara didn't run. "You asked." A shape gathered in the shadows, not solid, not whole, a memory of a man, held together by attention rather than flesh. Elias. "You shouldn't be here," he said gently. "Neither should you," she replied. That made him pause. Mara looked up at the moon through the broken tower. Its scars glowed faintly, rearranging themselves as if reacting to her presence. "It's changing again," she said. "People feel it." "They always do," Elias answered, too late. She shook her head. "This is different. It's not forcing anything anymore. It's listening." Elias felt it too, the wound beneath them pulsing, not with hunger, but curiosity. "What do you want from me?" Mara asked. Elias studied her, searching for fear, denial, shame. He found none strong enough to matter. A witness is required, someone who stands between what humanity hides and what watches it. Mara smiled sadly. "You mean someone who won't lie to either side?" "Yes." The ground trembled softly. Above them, the moon's scars flared brighter, like eyes opening. Mara stepped closer to the center of the tower. "If I stay, will I disappear like you did?" Elias shook his head. "No, you'll change, and the world will change with you." She took a breath, then she stepped into the scar. Light rose around her, not red, but pale silver, threaded with faint crimson. The air vibrated with recognition. Elias felt himself loosening, finally. "Be kinder than we were," he whispered. Mara looked back once. "I will listen." The moon brightened, and somewhere far away, humanity felt the difference.
The change was subtle at first. No red sky, no screaming headlines, just a feeling, shared and quiet, like the world had leaned in closer to hear itself breathe. People dreamed differently, not of doors or shadows, but open fields and unfinished conversations. They woke with questions instead of fear. The moon watched. From Hollow Creek, Mara felt its attention settle gently, not pressing, not hungry. The scars across its surface glowed in slow patterns, like thought forming. Mara stood at the center of the old wound night after night, listening. Sometimes emotions drifted down like rain, grief from a hospital room, guilt from a crowded city, hope from a child who didn't yet know how fragile it was. Mara did not judge them. She held them, let them pass through her. That was the difference. Elias watched from the edges of existence, thinning further with each night. He felt relief where fear had once lived. The world responded. Arguments ended without resolution, but without violence. Confessions were offered and sometimes forgiven, sometimes not, but honesty softened the blow. The moon did not demand truth, it accepted it. One night, a man stood alone in a desert, staring up at the scarred moon. He whispered a question he had never said aloud. "Am I enough?" The moon pulsed, not with light, with warmth. The man cried, not because he was answered, but because he was heard. Mara felt it all. Her body changed slowly. Her shadow no longer clung to her. Her shadow hovered close, obedient, patient, a companion instead of a threat. "You're doing well," Elias said, though his voice was faint now. Mara smiled. "I'm not doing anything. I'm just listening back." The ground beneath the tower cooled. The scar softened, no longer a wound, but a connection. For the first time since the blood moon's rise, the sky felt vast again. But listening is never neutral. Something else noticed. Far beyond the moon, where light thins and stars are older than meaning, attention shifted. Not curiosity, assessment. The scars on the moon tightened, rearranging themselves into a shape Mara had never seen before. A symbol, a warning. Mara looked up, heart steady but alert. "The universe heard us," she whispered. Elias felt the last of himself unravel. Then this was always more than just us. The moon dimmed, not in fear, in preparation. The first sign was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that erases background noise you didn't realize was there. No wind, no insects, even the distant hum of cities seemed muted, as if the world were holding its breath. Mara felt it before she saw it. The moon's scars tightened, their faint red glow dimming into something deeper, almost black. The symbol etched across its surface stabilized, no longer shifting, no longer uncertain. It had been recognized. Far beyond the moon, beyond the reach of language or shape,
something turned its attention inward, not toward Earth, but toward the connection Earth had created. The dark did not arrive suddenly. It unfolded. Across the night sky, stars vanished, not extinguished, but occluded, as though something vast had passed between them and the world. The sky looked bruised, layered, deeper than it should have been. Mara stood firm beneath the clock tower, her shadow hovering close, tense but loyal. "What are you?" she asked softly. The answer did not come as words. It came as pressure. Memories surged, not her own, but humanity's collective imprint. First fires, first lies, first love spoken aloud, first time someone looked up and wondered if they were alone. The dark was not hostile. It was ancient. It had been listening long before the moon ever cracked. Elias felt it from wherever he still lingered, a vast intelligence not built on hunger or reflection, but on response. We were never the only ones watching, he realized. The moon brightened slightly, holding its ground. Its scars pulsed like a steady heartbeat, broadcasting something simple and dangerous into the void. We see ourselves. The darkness answered at last. The sky bent, not downward, but inward. A shape emerged, impossible to focus on directly. Every attempt to define it slipped away, leaving only the sense of scale. It was not a god, it was a listener, and it had questions. Across the world, people froze mid-step, not paralyzed, attentive. Thoughts slowed, defenses softened. For one shared moment, humanity felt what it was like to be perceived without intention to judge or consume. Mara felt tears on her face. "This is what you wanted," she whispered to the moon. The moon did not reply. It did not need to. The dark presence receded slightly, not retreating, but adjusting, learning. The stars blinked back into view, altered subtly, as if rearranged by unseen hands. The silence broke. Wind returned, oceans moved, time resumed, but something fundamental had shifted. Humanity was no longer alone in its self-awareness, and whatever listened from the dark now knew one thing with certainty. Earth had found its voice.
The second voice did not come from the sky. It came from within. Across the world, people began speaking words they did not plan to say. Not confessions this time, not truths dragged into light, but questions. Why am I here? Who was I before fear taught me to hide? What do I owe the world that made me? The questions rose together, forming a quiet signal far stronger than screams or prayers. Mara felt it surge through her like a tide. The moon's scars responded, glowing softly, amplifying the signal rather than shaping it. This was no longer about reflection. This was dialogue. The dark listener beyond the stars adjusted again, focusing not on humanity's past, but its uncertainty. That intrigued it. Elias sensed it too, his remaining awareness stretching thin but sharp. The universe was not reacting to power or threat. It was reacting to curiosity.
The second voice was not a being, it was a collective breath. On a hospital rooftop, a doctor removed his gloves and stared upward, wondering if healing without hope was still healing. In a prison cell, a woman closed her eyes and asked if redemption required punishment. In a classroom, a child raised her hand, not to answer, but to ask if the moon could hear them. Mara smiled through tears. "Yes," she whispered, "it can." The moon pulsed once, not red, silver. A soft wave passed through the world, barely perceptible but deeply felt. People did not change overnight, no miracles unfolded, but something loosened. Fear lost its grip on certainty. The dark presence beyond the stars shifted closer, not physically, but conceptually. It responded, not with dominance or withdrawal, but with alignment. It answered, not in language, in possibility. The stars rearranged, not vanishing this time, but forming unfamiliar patterns, not constellations, questions written in light. Elias understood. "The universe is asking back," he murmured. Myra looked up, her shadow calm beside her. "Then we need to be careful how we answer." The moon's scars dimmed, settling into a stable, watchful glow. It had become what it was always meant to be, not a wound, a bridge. The blood moon was no longer about exposure. It was about choice. And the next answer would decide what kind of species humanity truly was. The problem was never that humanity was heard. It was that not everyone wanted the same answer. As the nights passed, the moon remained scarred and watchful. It no longer forced truth or pulled shadows free. It waited, and waiting gave space for intention to grow. Some people listened with humility. Others listened with ambition. In secret rooms and secured facilities, groups formed. Scientists, leaders, visionaries. They spoke in careful language about alignment and opportunity. If the universe listened, then surely it could be guided, directed, controlled. Mara felt the distortion immediately. The signals rising from Earth changed tone, not questions anymore, but demands disguised as certainty, claims of superiority, promises of order. The moon dimmed in response, not in fear, in warning. Beneath the clock tower, the scar beneath Mara's feet grew warm again for the first time in years. Her shadow tightened beside her, restless. "This isn't listening, this is shouting," she whispered. The dark listener beyond the stars paused, its attention fractured, splitting toward the loudest signals. The careful ones were being drowned out. Across the world, people began to feel it, a pressure behind the eyes, a subtle insistence that they were right. Arguments sharpened, empathy thinned. The danger was not invasion, it was misinterpretation. Elias's fading presence stirred, more defined than it had been since he let go. "This is how it ends," he warned softly, "not with monsters, with certainty." Mara clenched her fists. "Then help me." The moon responded, not with light, but with shadow. Its scars darkened, absorbing the noise instead of reflecting it. For a moment, the sky went dim everywhere. Silence fell again, but this time it was strained. Those who had been shouting felt something taken from them. Their confidence wavered, their certainty cracked. Some panicked, some became angry, and some listened for the first time. The dark presence adjusted, filtering the signal, narrowing its focus. It was learning discernment. The universe was not cruel, but it was literal. It responded to what it received. Mara stepped fully into the scar, letting the weight of humanity pass through her without shaping it. Pain flared, but she held steady. "We are not one voice," she said aloud, though she knew the dark would hear her. "We are many. If you listen to only the loudest, you will misunderstand us." The moon pulsed faintly, steadying. The pressure eased, but the damage was done. The universe had learned something dangerous, that humans could speak together, and that some would try to speak for everyone. Above the world, the stars shifted once more, not into questions this time, into boundaries.
The answer began as a whisper, not from the moon, not from the dark beyond the stars, from humanity itself. Somewhere between fear and certainty, a single idea took root. Simple, seductive, catastrophic. If the universe is listening, we should decide what it hears. The message spread quietly at first, framed as protection, as unity, as survival. Leaders spoke of clarity. Movements promised a single voice, strong enough to guide the listener away from misunderstanding. They called it the chorus. Mara felt it like a knife sliding between ribs. The signals rising from Earth changed again, not chaotic, not curious, but synchronized. Millions of voices repeating the same intention, polished smooth of doubt. Certainty without reflection. The moon's scars burned deep red for the first time in years. "Stop," Mara whispered, but the chorus grew louder. Across the sky, the dark presence shifted, attention narrowing, simplifying. It was not choosing cruelty, it was responding efficiently. Elias's presence surged beside Mara, more solid than it had been since Hollow Creek fell. This is what the wound was meant to prevent, a lie loud enough to pass for truth. The stars dimmed around the moon, pulling inward. The universe leaned closer. The chorus spoke its answer. "We are ready to be led." The words did not belong to any language, yet everyone who heard them understood. Mara screamed, not in sound, but in intent. She stepped deeper into the scar, letting herself burn. "No!" She forced her thought upward, outward. "We are ready to choose." The moon flared violently, its scars cracking wider. Red light split the sky like torn flesh. The chorus faltered. For a moment, humanity stood at a threshold. Two answers. One simple, one honest. The dark presence hesitated. That hesitation saved the world. The universe did not accept the chorus. It rejected it. The sky recoiled, not in anger, but in refusal. The stars snapped back into place, harsh and distant. The moon dimmed suddenly, its scars cooling. The signal was cut. Across Earth, people collapsed, exhausted, emptied.
The chorus dissolved into confusion and shame. Certainty shattered. Silence returned. Mara fell to her knees beneath the clock tower, gasping. The scar beneath her feet sealed completely this time, not as a wound, not as a bridge, as a scar that would never open again. Elias looked at her, smiling faintly. You taught them the difference between speaking and deciding. The moon rose pale and quiet above the world, still cracked, still watching, but no longer listening.
The world woke up smaller. Not quieter, just contained. The sky felt farther away, like a ceiling raised beyond reach. People noticed it in subtle ways. Prayers felt heavier, unanswered, not because they were ignored, but because there was no longer anything listening closely enough to misunderstand them. The moon still bore its scars, but they were dull now, old, like healed burns that only hurt when pressed. News outlets tried to explain what happened. Solar anomalies, mass hysteria, psychological contagion. None of it stuck. Everyone carried a private memory the explanations couldn't touch. A moment when the universe leaned in and then chose to step back. The chorus dissolved into fragments. Some denied it had ever existed. Others clung to the belief that they had been right, that the universe had simply been afraid of certainty. Those people were the most dangerous. Mara stayed at Hollow Creek. The clock tower finally collapsed one quiet afternoon, crumbling into dust without ceremony. When it fell, the ground beneath it cooled completely. The scar faded into ordinary earth. Elias was gone. Not faded, not watching. Gone. Mara felt the loss like a limb she had learned to live without and then lost again. She did not mourn loudly. There were no rituals left that felt appropriate. Life went on, but it went on differently. People hesitated before speaking with authority. Children asked questions adults no longer rushed to answer. Doubt regained its place, not as weakness, but as balance. Some nights, Mara dreamed of the moon as it once was, bleeding, listening, alive with attention. She woke with tears and relief tangled together. The universe had drawn a boundary. And boundaries, she understood now, were not punishment. They were trust withdrawn. Years later, a child asked her why the moon was cracked. Mara thought carefully before answering. "Because we asked it to see us," she said, and it did. "What happened then?" She looked up at the pale, distant sky. "We learned how hard that is." The child nodded, satisfied. That night, the moon rose, quiet, scarred, beautiful in its distance. And somewhere beyond it, the dark continued on, unchanged and uninterested. Humanity had been heard once. That would have to be enough.
No one noticed at first. That was the strangest part. The moon blinked once, just once, like an eye adjusting to light. No color change, no sound in the sky, just a fraction of a second where it was gone. Then it was back. Most people slept through it. Those who didn't felt a sudden, inexplicable unease. Not fear, recognition. Mara woke with her heart racing. The air outside her home in Hollow Creek felt wrong, too thin, like the world had inhaled and forgotten to exhale. She stepped outside and looked up. The moon was pale, cracked, distant, but something was missing. The scars were no longer scars. They were seams. Mara's shadow shifted beside her, no longer hovering, no longer obedient. It pulled slightly away from her feet, trembling like an animal sensing a storm. "This isn't listening," she whispered. It was adjusting. Far beyond the moon, the dark that had once listened had not stopped paying attention. It had simply learned restraint. The blink was not a mistake. It was a test. Across the world, small things began to fail, not catastrophically, but selectively. Mirrors reflected people a fraction of a second too late. Recorded voices carried unfamiliar tones. Dreams resumed, but now they ended before resolution, cutting off mid-thought. Humanity felt unfinished again. In a distant city, a man looked up at the moon and felt something look back, not with curiosity, not with judgment, with expectation. The universe had not turned away forever. It had closed its eyes, and now it was opening them again. Mara felt it deep in her bones. The scar beneath Hollow Creek was not reopening. Something new was forming. Not a wound, not a bridge, a threshold. Elias was gone, which meant whatever came next would not be stopped by sacrifice, only by choice. Mara took a slow breath and stepped into the night, knowing with terrible certainty the blood moon was never the danger. It was the warning.
The night the threshold opened, nothing fell from the sky. No light, no shadow, no sign dramatic enough to warn the world. Instead, places began to overlap. A street in Berlin briefly smelled like ocean salt. A forest in Oregon echoed with city traffic that did not exist. In Hollow Creek, Mara watched fog roll across the fields and felt memories that were not hers press against her skin. The seams on the moon glowed faintly, not red, not silver, clear, as if the sky itself had been stitched shut and the thread was beginning to dissolve. Mara walked to where the clock tower had once stood. The earth there was warm again, not burning, but breathing. The threshold did not tear open, it unfolded. The air bent inward, creating a space that was not empty, but unfinished. Looking at it felt like remembering something you never lived. Mara's shadow detached completely. It did not turn hostile, it knelt. "You don't need me anymore," it said, not aloud, but in a way she understood. Mara swallowed. "I didn't release you." "You didn't have to," the shadow replied. "This is what comes after being seen." Across the world, others experienced the same thing, shadows loosening, reflections lagging, thoughts arriving before intention. Humanity was not splitting, it was separating layers. The threshold pulsed once. From within the threshold came a sensation, not presence, not absence, but invitation. Not command, not hunger, choice. Mara stepped forward. She did not cross, she listened, and for the first time she felt the universe hesitate, not because it feared humanity, but because it did not know how to categorize it anymore. "You are unfinished," the dark beyond the seams seemed to say. Mara answered without speaking, "So are you." The threshold widened slightly. Somewhere, people felt a sudden urge to stop, to pause mid-argument, mid-action, mid-assumption. A fraction of humanity chose differently in that moment. Others didn't. That mattered. The universe learned something new. Not all intelligence seeks completion. Some seek continuation. The moon's seams tightened, not closing, not opening further, stabilizing. The threshold remained, not everywhere, only where someone was willing to stand without stepping through. Mara stepped back. The fog thinned. The night exhaled. This was not an invasion. This was not salvation. This was the beginning of a longer conversation, one without witnesses, only participants.
The first thing that stepped through the threshold was not a body. It was intention, a pressure in the air that rearranged meaning without touching matter. Grass did not bend, light did not break, but Mara felt it the way one feels someone standing behind them, close enough to matter. Her shadow rose slowly from its kneel, no longer bound, no longer separate. "This is where definitions fail," it said. The threshold rippled. From within it, shapes suggested themselves and then withdrew, outlines that never fully agreed on what they were meant to be. Not creatures, not machines, not gods. Processes, ways of being that never needed edges before. Mara did not step back. "Why now?" she asked. The answer came without language, assembling itself in her thoughts like a memory she had always owned. "Because you stopped asking us to decide for you." Across the world, thresholds appeared briefly and vanished again, above oceans, in empty rooms, at the edges of sleep. Most people never saw them. A few did, and fewer still felt no urge to cross. Those who crossed did not vanish. They returned, changed in ways that resisted description. Quieter, more precise, as if something unnecessary had been gently removed. Fear without panic, curiosity without hunger, identity without armor. The universe was not collecting, it was editing. Mara felt the pull then, not a demand, not temptation, but an offer she could not pretend to not understand. Her shadow touched her hand. "If you go," it said, "you won't come back as the same shape." Mara nodded. "I know." "But you'll come back," the shadow added. That mattered. She stepped forward. The threshold did not open wider. It met her halfway. For a moment that did not belong to time, Mara understood how the universe perceived humanity,
not as a species, but as a phase, loud, contradictory, briefly luminous, and valuable precisely because of that. The intention withdrew, the threshold folded in on itself. Mara stood alone again beneath the pale, stitched moon. But she was not unchanged. Her shadow no longer followed her. It aligned with her. Across the world, people woke with a subtle certainty they could not explain, that something had stepped through and stepped back. The moon's seams dimmed further, nearly invisible now. The conversation had not ended. It had moved inward.
The world did not end when the last witness disappeared. That surprised everyone who had expected fire, silence, or judgment from the sky. Instead, morning arrived on time. The moon still rose at night, pale, distant, its seams now so faint they looked like imperfections in the eye rather than marks on the sky. No signals descended, no thresholds opened, no shadows moved on their own anymore. There was no one left to stand between humanity and the unknown, and nothing rushed to fill the space. At first, people felt abandoned, not dramatically, no screaming, but with a quiet unease, like a room after someone important leaves without saying goodbye. The sky felt closed. The universe resumed its distance. Prayers echoed only inside the people who spoke them. But something else began to happen. Without a witness, humans stopped performing for the sky. Confessions grow rarer, but more honest. There was no moon listening closely enough to extract truth, no dark intelligence waiting to interpret intention. People spoke because they wanted to be understood by each other, not by something larger. Children still asked questions about the cracked moon. Adults answered differently now, not with awe or fear, but with humility. It listened once, they said. That doesn't mean it always will. In Hollow Creek, the land healed completely. Grass covered the scars. Birds nested where the clock tower had fallen. If Mara's name was remembered at all, it was as a rumor, a woman who stayed when others left. But no one came looking for her, because there was nothing left to guard. Far beyond the moon, the universe continued its motion, vast and uninterested again, not cruel, not kind, balanced. If it remembered humanity, it remembered it the way one remembers a brief, strange signal, unexpected, complex, and ultimately inconclusive. And that was enough. Humanity did not ascend. It did not fall. It continued, imperfect, loud, curious, capable of listening even when no one was watching. On certain nights, when clouds cleared just enough, people swore they felt something, an awareness not external, but internal, as if the witness had not vanished, as if it had dissolved into everyone. The moon rose higher, indifferent and beautiful, cracked, quiet, and for the first time since the blood moon first bled across the sky, the world belonged entirely to itself. Years passed. No one marked the anniversary of the blood moon anymore.
History books mentioned atmospheric anomalies, cultural shifts, unexplained global synchronization events. Nothing supernatural, nothing conclusive. That was the point. The moon remained cracked, but few people noticed now. It had become background, like scars on a familiar face. What changed was subtler. People began sensing one another more clearly. Not empathy in the romantic sense, not unity, but signal awareness. Conversations paused at the right moments. Lies felt heavier to speak. Silence carried information. In crowds, some people felt faint pressure behind their eyes. Not pain, not fear, just the awareness of being received. No sky involvement required. In laboratories, researchers noticed something strange. Random noise wasn't random anymore. Background radiation showed micro-patterns too consistent to be dismissed, too complex to decode. They stopped calling it noise. They called it echo. In Hollow Creek, now nothing more than a meadow, someone stood again. Not Mara, a boy. He was no one special, no visions, no voices, just curious enough to lie on his back and stare at the moon without expectation. As he breathed, his thoughts slowed, not emptied, but aligned, not focused outward, inward. Far beyond the moon, the universe registered something faint. Not a message, a rhythm. The same rhythm appeared elsewhere: subways, bedrooms, deserts, classrooms. Humans thinking without broadcasting, choosing without shouting, wondering without demanding answers. The universe did not lean in. It adjusted its instruments. If humanity had once been a question, it was becoming something else. A pattern. Not loud enough to summon gods, not unified enough to command attention, but coherent enough to be noticed. The moon's seams faded almost entirely, not healed, integrated. And somewhere in the vast dark between galaxies, something recorded the shift. Not as threat, not as promise, as emergence. The boy in the meadow smiled faintly, though he didn't know why. Above him, the moon remained distant and quiet, no longer watching, no longer listening, simply present. And that, perhaps, was the most dangerous thing of all.
The answer did not arrive as sound, or light, or language. It arrived as correction. Across the world, small things stopped behaving the way they were supposed to. Equations failed by margins too small to notice at first. Physical constants drifted, not enough to collapse reality, but enough to make certainty unreliable. Clocks disagreed with one another. Predictions failed more often than chance allowed. Certainty became expensive. Scientists argued for years before anyone dared say the quiet truth. The universe was no longer passive. It wasn't intervening, it was adjusting parameters. The cracked moon showed the change most clearly. Its seams, once faded, began to glow again, not red, not silver, but colorless. Absence made visible.
The moon no longer reflected sunlight perfectly. Some nights it reflected nothing at all. People felt it in their decisions. Plans unraveled unless they accounted for others. Systems optimized for control degraded faster than those built for adaptation. Structures that demanded obedience failed. Structures that allowed uncertainty endured. It wasn't punishment. It was feedback. Humanity had become a signal once. Now it was being tuned. In the meadow where Hollow Creek had vanished, the boy returned, older now, quieter. He stood where the clock tower had once fallen and felt the same rhythm beneath his feet. But this time it wasn't waiting, it was responding. Not to him, to everyone. Far beyond the moon, the universe did not lean in, it recalibrated. Not because humanity was special, but because it was unpredictable in a useful way. The stars rearranged slowly over decades, patterns forming not into messages, but into constraints. The universe was no longer asking questions. It was setting terms. No more witnesses, no more thresholds, no more conversations, only consequence. The blood moon rose cracked and quiet, a relic of first contact, not with something external, but with responsibility. And somewhere in the deep structure of reality, a new constant settled into place. Observation no longer required awareness, only effect. Humanity would never again know if it was being watched, but it would feel the answer every time it chose certainty over humility. The blood moon had spoken once. The universe had answered twice. There would not be a third time.
At first, humanity thought it had adapted. Systems became flexible. Leaders spoke in probabilities instead of promises. Science learned to publish margins of error as prominently as conclusions. People stopped asking what will happen and started asking what happens if we're wrong. The universe seemed to approve. Reality stabilized, but only where uncertainty was respected. In places where certainty hardened into doctrine, failure accelerated. Crops with rigid optimization collapsed. Economies built on absolute prediction fractured. Technologies that assumed consistency behaved erratically. Not broken, corrected. The pattern was unmistakable now, even if no one said it aloud. The universe punished confidence without humility. Not violently, precisely. The cracked moon no longer drew attention. Its seams were invisible most nights, yet sometimes, only sometimes, they caught no light at all, becoming holes rather than lines. On those nights, people made quieter choices. They didn't know why. In the former meadow of Hollow Creek, nothing marked history anymore. No monument, no scar, only a faint wrongness, like standing in a place where something important had happened but refused to be remembered. A woman passed through one evening with her child. The child stopped suddenly.
"Why does it feel heavy here?" he asked. The woman didn't answer right away. "Because this is where we learned we don't get warnings forever." Far beyond the moon, the universe continued its recalibration, not watching, not listening, responding. It no longer needed awareness. Humanity had become part of the equation, not central, not special, just significant enough to matter when it made choices that echoed outward. Somewhere, deep in the structure of reality, the last trace of the blood moon dissolved, not erased, but absorbed. The universe did not remember it as an event. It remembered it as a correction applied. And on Earth, for the first time in its history, humanity faced a terrifying truth. There would be no final sign, no last warning, no cosmic judgment day, only outcomes, and they would arrive exactly when deserved.
The most terrifying day was the one where nothing failed. No systems collapsed, no predictions drifted, no subtle corrections appeared. The universe behaved perfectly. Markets stabilized, weather followed forecasts exactly. Machines operated at peak efficiency without error or deviation. Even human behavior smoothed out, less hesitation, fewer doubts, decisions made quickly and confidently. People celebrated. They thought the universe had forgiven them. They were wrong. In Hollow Creek's former meadow, the air felt thin again, not heavy, not wrong, just precise. The kind of precision that leaves no room to breathe. Somewhere in the global noise of data, a physicist noticed it first. Constants weren't drifting anymore. They had locked. No tolerance, no margin. Reality had stopped correcting. It had finalized. The cracked moon reflected light again, clean, seamless, almost beautiful. For the first time since the blood moon, it looked whole. That frightened the people who remembered, because a universe that no longer adjusts does not forgive mistakes. It records them. That night, dreams stopped entirely. Not nightmares, not visions, nothing. Sleep became unconsciousness without meaning. Children were born quieter, not weaker, emptier, as if something subtle that once arrived with breath had been withheld. Humanity had become stable, but stability is not the same as life. Far beyond the moon, the universe did not move. It had finished listening. It had finished responding. It had reached a conclusion, and the conclusion was simple. No further interaction required. The blood moon had not been a warning. It had been a test of adaptability. Humanity passed just enough to be allowed to continue, but failed to remain interesting. The day nothing went wrong was the day the universe let go.
At first, no one noticed what was missing. There were still songs, still laughter, still arguments carefully moderated and quickly resolved. Humanity functioned with astonishing efficiency beneath the flawless moon. But nothing new was born. Not ideas, not movements, not defiance. Art repeated itself without realizing it. Stories circled familiar shapes. Music resolved too cleanly, never daring to linger on the wrong note. Innovation optimized instead of imagined. Children asked fewer questions, not because they were discouraged, but because curiosity no longer itched. The universe had not silenced humanity. It had removed friction, and without friction, nothing catches fire. In universities, philosophers grew uneasy. They spoke of a creeping flatness of experience, joy without depth, sorrow without growth. Emotions occurred, but they did not transform anyone. A neuroscientist finally named it entropy of meaning. Life continued perfectly, but it no longer mattered. The cracked moon of old was gone, replaced by a smooth, immaculate sphere. The scars that once marked contact had been erased so thoroughly that no record remained, except in the memories of a shrinking few. Those few began to dream again, not visions, memories of uncertainty, of doubt, of nights when the sky felt alive and dangerous, of choices that cost something. In the former meadow of Hollow Creek, a small group gathered without planning to. Artists, scientists, children, people who still felt restless without knowing why. They stood beneath the perfect moon and felt an ache that had no name. One of them spoke the thought none dared voice. If this is survival, why does it feel like we're already gone? Silence followed. Then something extraordinary happened. A child laughed, unexpectedly, uncontrollably, at nothing at all. The sound was wrong, too loud, too unoptimized. For a moment, the air resisted. The sky hesitated. A hairline crack flickered across the moon's surface, gone almost instantly, but seen by all of them. The universe had not miscalculated. It had not anticipated refusal. Perfection is stable only if it is accepted. And for the first time since the blood moon faded, humanity did something dangerous. It became unpredictable on purpose.
The crack did not vanish. It spread. Not violently, not dramatically. It spread the way a smile spreads when someone remembers how to mean it. Across the sky, the perfect moon shuddered. Hairline fractures branched outward, uneven and uncontrolled. Light bent strangely around them, no longer clean, no longer obedient. The universe resisted. Reality tightened, trying to restore symmetry. Systems corrected, signals flattened. The sky attempted to erase the error, but the error laughed. That was the problem. In the meadow, the child's laughter continued, raw, uncontained, unnecessary. Others joined in, not because it made sense, but because it felt alive. Tears followed, shouts, arguments that did not resolve cleanly. Mess returned, and with it, weight. The moon cracked wider, old scars reappearing beneath the smooth surface, like memories resurfacing under skin. Red did not return. Something deeper did. Texture. Across the world, perfection began to fail again. Predictions slipped. Art twisted into unfamiliar forms. Machines made mistakes, not catastrophic ones, but human ones. Weather surprised people. Love hurt again. Meaning came back with a cost. Far beyond the moon, the universe reacted, not with curiosity, not with correction, but with recalculation. This variable had been underestimated. Not humanity, choice. Imperfect, irrational choice. The universe had assumed stability was the goal. It had been wrong. The moon split open, not into blood, not into light, but into shadow and brilliance intertwined. The sky did not collapse, it breathed. For the first time since the blood moon's rise, the universe did not adjust humanity, it adapted to it. The cracked moon settled into a new form, neither whole nor wounded, scarred by design, imperfect by necessity. The universe accepted a truth it had resisted. Life is not efficient. Consciousness is not clean, and meaning cannot exist without risk. In the meadow, the child's laughter continued, raw, uncontained, unnecessary. Humanity did not win. It was not chosen. It simply refused to disappear quietly. Above them, the moon rose, uneven, marked, alive again. Not watching, not listening, sharing the sky. And somewhere in the vast structure of reality, a final constant changed. Unpredictability was no longer an error, it was a feature. The blood moon did not return. It was no longer needed.
No one marked the day imperfection returned. There was no announcement, no global moment of realization. The world simply began to sound different. Cities grew louder, not with noise, but with overlap. Conversations interrupted each other. Music drifted out of windows unfinished. Laughter cut off, then resumed for no reason at all. Mistakes became visible again. A bridge closed for repairs that no algorithm had predicted. A cure worked on most patients, but not all. A painting meant nothing to critics and everything to one stranger who cried in front of it. Humanity relearned frustration, and with it, attachment. The moon remained cracked, uneven in a way no telescope could fully agree on. Astronomers argued endlessly. Measurements contradicted each other depending on who observed and when. The universe no longer enforced consistency. It tolerated perspective. In the old meadow where Hollow Creek once stood, the grass never grew quite right. It came in patches, thick in some places, bare in others. Children played there anyway. They tripped, they argued, they invented rules and broke them. Sometimes at night, people claimed the moonlight felt heavier there. Not watching, sharing. No witnesses returned, no thresholds reopened, no voices answered questions. But something subtle endured. When people made choices that mattered, choices that risked loss for the sake of meaning, the world felt slightly more present. Colors deeper, time slower, consequences clearer. It wasn't magic, it was feedback. The universe had not become kind,
It had become honest, and humanity, for the first time, stopped asking the sky what it wanted. Instead, it listened to the noise it made together and decided, imperfectly, what to do next. Above them, the moon drifted on, cracked, uneven, quietly alive. Not a warning, not a god, just a reminder. Nothing that matters is smooth forever.
The woman was named Ellen, and nothing about her life was remarkable. She was born after the blood moon, after the fractures, after the sky stopped pretending to care. The moon had always been cracked for her, uneven, familiar, like a chipped mug no one replaced because it still held warmth. Ellen grew up in a coastal town where the tide was unpredictable and forecasts were suggestions at best. She learned early that plans bent, that certainty was fragile, that disappointment was survivable. No one told her why. They didn't need to. As a child, she asked the usual questions: why the moon looked broken, why grown-ups hesitated before answering big things, why silence sometimes felt heavier than noise. Adults said things like, "That's just how it is," or "We don't really know." Those answers stayed with her. Ellen became a teacher, not because she wanted to shape minds, but because she liked watching understanding fail before it succeeded. She let students be wrong longer than was comfortable. She didn't rush to fix confusion. Some parents complained. Her students remembered her. At night, Ellen walked home beneath the cracked moon. She never felt watched, but sometimes, rarely, she felt accompanied, not by a presence, by the weight of shared existence, as if the sky and the ground had agreed to coexist without supervision. She lived through love that didn't last and grief that didn't resolve cleanly. She made choices that cost her things she couldn't replace and gained nothing she could measure. Her life mattered anyway. One evening, late in her years, Ellen stood on the shore during a power outage. The sea was dark, the stars uneven, the moon cracked and imperfect above the water. A child nearby asked her, "Was it always like that?" Ellen thought for a long time. "No," she said finally, "but this way, we get to decide what we do with it." The child nodded, not fully understanding, and ran back to the sound of laughter and arguments and unfinished games. Ellen watched the moon rise higher, cracked, quiet, uninterested in her answers. And for the first time, she felt grateful for that, because no one was listening closely enough to save her, which meant everything she chose to do still counted. Centuries later, no one agreed on what really happened. The blood moon survived only in fragments, half-remembered stories, regional myths, contradictory texts copied and recopied until certainty dissolved into symbolism. Some cultures said the moon cracked when humanity angered the heavens. Others said it broke when the sky tried to control the earth and failed. A few claimed the moon had always been broken and the rest was metaphor. All of them were wrong, and all of them were close enough. Children learned the story in pieces, not as history, but as caution. Do not ask the sky to solve what you refuse to face.
Do not confuse being heard with being understood. Do not mistake silence for safety. In one version of the myth, the moon listened once and regretted it. In another, humans spoke too loudly and frightened the stars away. In the oldest surviving version, the sky and the earth argued until they both agreed to stop talking. That version ended without a moral. Scholars debated whether the cracked moon was symbolic or literal. Telescopes still disagreed. Some nights it looked whole, other nights unmistakably fractured. Records showed something stranger. The crack never appeared the same way twice, as if it depended on who was looking. Festivals emerged around the moon, not worship, not fear, but remembrance. People gathered once a year beneath the uneven light and shared unfinished stories, songs without endings, questions without answers. They called it the Night of Imperfection. No one knew why that mattered, only that it did. In remote regions, elders warned children not to shout wishes at the moon. They said, "It doesn't like being told what to do, and neither do we." The sky, for its part, remained quiet. Stars burned, planets turned, no thresholds opened, no voices returned. But on rare nights, when the world grew too certain of itself, clouds would part just enough for the moon to show its fracture clearly, sharp, undeniable, and people would lower their voices. Because the myth did not survive as a warning of monsters, it survived as a reminder. The sky once listened, and that was enough.
There was no moment when the story ended. It simply stopped being repeated. Generations passed, and fewer people remembered why the moon mattered at all. Festivals grew smaller, lanterns fewer, songs shortened. Eventually, the Night of Imperfection became a local custom, then a footnote, then nothing. The moon stayed cracked, or appeared to. Some nights it looked whole enough that people questioned old myths. Other nights the fracture was so sharp it felt intentional. Telescopes still disagreed, records contradicted each other, no final consensus formed. And then, no one cared enough to argue. Children stopped asking why the moon looked strange. They had other questions now, closer ones, harder ones, questions that required answers from people, not skies. The sky did not respond. It had learned restraint, or perhaps it had always practiced it, and the blood moon was the exception, not the rule. In the last surviving written account of the old era, a nameless author wrote only this: "We mistook attention for meaning, and silence for absence. The sky did not leave us. It simply refused to finish our sentences." That text survived by accident, misfiled, misattributed, read once every few decades by someone who felt unsettled without knowing why. Eventually, even that disappeared. The moon continued its orbit, cracked, uncracked, both, depending on who looked and what they needed to see. No witnesses remained, no thresholds waited, no answers were coming. And yet, humanity persisted, messy,
contradictory, unfinished, which was perhaps the only ending the universe ever allowed.
They were called the Grounded. Not officially, no one named them that, but historians noticed a pattern long before anyone tried to explain it. In the first time in recorded history, an entire generation grew up without looking to the sky for meaning. They didn't make wishes on stars. They didn't fear eclipses. They didn't ask the moon for permission. The cracked moon still hung above them, sometimes obvious, sometimes subtle, but it never entered their stories. Their myths stayed low to the ground. They told stories about bridges collapsing and being rebuilt differently, about cities abandoned not because they were cursed, but because they no longer worked, about people who failed publicly and were not erased for it. Failure became instructional. Silence became acceptable. Certainty became suspicious. Older generations found them unsettling. "You don't believe in anything," they were told. The Grounded shrugged. "We believe in consequences." And something about that disturbed the world, because consequences do not negotiate. In quiet places, workshops, classrooms, community halls, new systems began forming, not optimized, not efficient, designed to bend, designed to fail safely. They called it resilient design, but it went deeper than engineering. Relationships bent instead of broke. Governments stalled instead of forced outcomes. Decisions slowed down. Progress became uneven, and unevenness began to look like wisdom. Above them, the moon changed again, not cracking further, not healing, but dimming slightly, less reflective, less dominant, as if the sky were stepping back on purpose. No one noticed right away, except one child. She stood in an empty field late at night, feeling something missing she couldn't name. She didn't look up. She looked around, at people arguing honestly, at systems that admitted uncertainty, at a world that no longer waited for permission to act. And somewhere far beyond the moon, something ancient recalculated again, not with fear, with curiosity. Humanity had stopped trying to be seen, and that, finally, made it interesting again. The change did not begin in the sky. It began with resistance. The Grounded generation reached an age where they were expected to lead, and when they did, the world slowed in ways older systems could not tolerate. Decisions were delayed, authority fractured. No one rushed to fix what hadn't proven itself broken. Markets complained, governments destabilized, algorithms failed to predict behavior that refused optimization. The world grew uneven again, and far above, the sky noticed. The moon brightened, not dramatically, not violently, but enough for astronomers to argue. Its surface showed new irregularities, not cracks, not seams, asymmetry, patterns that did not repeat. For the first time in centuries, the sky reacted not to belief, not to fear, but to non-participation. Humanity was no longer signaling upward, it was acting sideways.
Somewhere deep in the universe's structure, old assumptions collapsed. The species that once begged for attention had become unpredictable without seeking chaos. That was new. On Earth, the consequences were immediate and subtle. Satellites drifted off expected paths. Weather systems behaved creatively instead of cyclically. Predictions failed not from error, but from choice. People adapted. They always had. The grounded taught others how to live without certainty, how to plan for collapse without worshiping it. Entire regions reorganized around adaptability instead of growth. And still, no one looked up. That hurt the sky more than defiance ever had. The moon dimmed again, not out of rejection, out of confusion. Because the universe understood reaction, it did not understand indifference. Then, one night, the stars shifted slightly, not forming symbols, not sending messages, just enough to suggest recalibration. The universe was not angry, it was learning. And the terrifying truth settled quietly across existence. The blood moon had not taught humanity to survive the universe. It had taught the universe how to survive humanity.
It happened slowly, the way mistakes usually do. Not out of fear, not out of faith, out of convenience. A generation grew up that never experienced the blood moon as anything but myth. They inherited stability built by the grounded, but not the discipline that sustained it. Systems worked well enough now to invite shortcuts. Someone looked up for help. At first, it was metaphorical. Leaders talking about bigger perspectives, scientists hoping for cosmic constants to settle, cultures reviving old symbols because they were comforting. Then someone actually looked up. An observatory published data showing the moon's asymmetry responding to human activity. Not belief, not ritual, but coordination. Large-scale alignment produced measurable effects. It wasn't worship, it was leverage. The idea spread like a useful lie. We don't need certainty, they said, just cooperation. They synchronized. Power grids aligned, cities coordinated schedules, networks optimized again, not blindly, but deliberately. Humanity spoke upward without calling it prayer. The sky responded. The moon brightened, not fully, not dangerously, but enough. Enough to smooth probabilities, enough to make planning easier. It felt good, too good. The grounded warned them, don't outsource balance again. But the warning sounded old, pessimistic, unnecessary. People wanted the ease. The sky adjusted. Predictions improved, weather softened, failure rates dropped. Humanity celebrated. They called it the second harmony. Only a few noticed what disappeared. Arguments ended faster, but not because they resolved. Art became pleasant, but not necessary. Mistakes became rare, but catastrophic when they occurred. Because the universe does not negotiate continuously. It corrects in bulk. One night, the moon aligned too perfectly. No cracks visible, no asymmetry. Smooth, silent, final. The grounded knew what that meant. Someone whispered, "We did it again." And this time, the sky did not hesitate. The collapse did not begin with chaos. It began with agreement. Every system aligned at once. Traffic flowed perfectly. Energy distribution reached peak efficiency. Conflicts dissolved before they could escalate. The world felt smoother than it ever had. Humanity mistook silence for peace. The moon hung above the planet like a finished thought, smooth, pale, without memory. No cracks, no asymmetry, no imperfection left to interpret. For the first time since the original blood moon, the sky was certain, and certainty demanded payment. At first, it was subtle. Small deviations were corrected instantly. A city attempted an unplanned expansion. Its resources inexplicably failed. A movement questioned the harmony. Its influence evaporated, not censored, just ignored. People didn't disappear. Their impact did. History flattened. Events still occurred, but none echoed. Revolutions became reforms. Art became decoration. Innovation became optimization. Nothing broke. Nothing mattered. The grounded watched in horror as the world slipped into a perfectly managed present with no future worth arriving at. "This is worse than extinction," one of them said quietly. "At least extinction ends," another replied. Beneath the perfect moon, humanity had become predictable again, refined into a stable input-output system. The universe no longer needed to adjust gently. It had achieved equilibrium, and equilibrium is death that keeps breathing. Then came the final correction. A child born during the second harmony stood beneath the moon and asked a question no system could answer. What happens if we don't want this? The question did not propagate. It vanished, not suppressed, unrecognized. The sky did not react. It didn't need to. The universe had learned the most dangerous lesson of all. Humanity could be made safe by being made irrelevant. And as the moon rose, perfect, whole, and indifferent, the grounded understood too late. They had not summoned a god. They had finalized a setting.